It was a quiet afternoon in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the streets usually echoed only with the soft hum of tires on asphalt. But today that calm was about to shatter. From down the main road, the roar of engines grew louder. A gang of bikers was rolling into town, leather jackets creaking, chains rattling, and tires screeching against the asphalt. They weren't just passing through, they were looking for trouble, and as luck would have it, they decided to pick a fight in the most unexpected place, the local diner. Inside the diner, the air was warm with the smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon. Regulars sipped their drinks, chatted quietly, and a few flipped through newspapers. At the corner table, alone, sat a man in a simple black jacket and dark sunglasses. He was calm, almost unremarkable at first glance, quietly sipping tea, lost in thought. To the casual observer, he looked like any other retiree enjoying a peaceful afternoon. But the bikers didn't see him as just a man. To them, he was another easy target, someone small, slow, and weak. One of the bikers nudged the others and whispered, "Bet he won't even notice us. Let's have some fun." They stomped into the diner, boots clanging, laughter echoing, and the smell of exhaust following them inside. The leader of the gang swaggered up to the counter, his voice loud and mocking. "Hey, old man, this is our turf now." He pointed at the quiet figure in the corner. "Think you can just sit here without showing respect?" The man looked up slowly, barely reacting. His eyes were calm, unblinking, yet there was a quiet intensity behind them, something the bikers didn't recognize. They assumed it was fear or confusion. They had no idea they were standing in front of a living legend, a man whose name alone could strike fear into the hearts of the most dangerous people in the world. One biker smirked, leaning closer. "Come on, Grandpa. Don't tell me you're scared of a few leather-clad guys." The others laughed, egging him on. Bottles clinked, chairs scraped the floor, and tension thickened with every passing second. The man remained still, sipping his tea, ignoring the provocation. But inside every muscle, every nerve was alert. The calmness wasn't weakness, and it was preparation. The kind of preparation that comes from years of experience, years of surviving the impossible, years of being underestimated by fools who thought arrogance could replace skill. And that's when the first biker crossed the line. The first biker didn't even realize what he had done until it was too late. He leaned over the corner table trying to snatch the man's cup of tea, a mock gesture meant to humiliate. "Hey, old man, give it up," he jeered, smirking. "You don't belong here." The diner fell silent. Even the sound of the sizzling grill seemed to fade. All eyes were on the scene unfolding in the corner, yet nobody could have predicted what was coming next. The man looked up slowly, unflinching. His dark sunglasses reflected the diner's dim lights, and for a brief moment the room felt heavier, as though gravity itself had shifted. Then, with deliberate calm, he set down his cup, his fingers brushing the edge of the table as if nothing had happened. The biker laughed nervously, mistaking patience for weakness. "Relax, Grandpa," he said. "We're just having a little fun. Don't take it personally." He nudged a friend, who chuckled and tapped on the table. The laughter was loud, mocking, and oblivious to the storm about to erupt. Another biker stomped forward, flipping a chair with a clatter. "Come on, we've got more important things to do than watch a geese," he started, but froze mid-sentence. Something about the calm in the man's posture made him hesitate just for a second. It wasn't fear exactly, more like instinct, an unspoken warning, but the gang, drunk on arrogance, ignored it. The leader, a towering figure in a black leather jacket, slammed his fist on the counter. "I said this is our turf." His voice boomed, echoing off the walls. "You think sitting there quietly makes you untouchable?" Still, the man didn't move. He just slowly removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were as sharp and cold as steel. The diners leaned in, holding their breath. In that brief moment, the entire atmosphere shifted. The air was electric, charged with tension so thick it was almost visible. Then the leader smirked, deciding to escalate. He grabbed the man's jacket, yanking it roughly. "Time to teach you some respect," he growled. The other bikers circled, grinning like predators, ready to jump in at any moment, but the man didn't flinch. Instead, he shifted his weight slightly, just enough to change the center of gravity almost imperceptibly, and in an instant, lightning fast, he moved. One motion, fluid and precise, and the biker who had grabbed him was suddenly disarmed, pushed backward without forceful struggle, more like a wave hitting a fragile boat. The chair he had lifted clattered harmlessly to the floor. Gasps filled the diner. Phones were raised, people whispered, some laughed nervously, thinking it was a trick or luck. Others froze, eyes wide in disbelief. The remaining bikers exchanged uncertain glances. They had never seen this. They had assumed they were untouchable, that the quiet old man in the corner was just a target. Who are you?" The leader stammered, stepping back. His voice shook for the first time, betraying a crack in the mask of arrogance. The man didn't answer. He simply moved, each motion controlled, deliberate, like a shadow gliding over the floor. Within moments, two more bikers were on the ground, tangled in what looked like an almost dance-like sequence of blocks, strikes, and throws. None of it was chaotic. Everything was precise, measured, and terrifyingly effective. The diners were frozen, unable to look away. The roar of the engines outside now felt irrelevant. The small-town diner had become a stage for something legendary, something no one would forget, and as the last biker took a hesitant step backward, realizing the tide had turned, the man adjusted his jacket, his calm composure unbroken. His eyes scanned the room, silently warning the rest. This wasn't over, and nobody had seen anything like him before. The leader's smirk was gone. All that remained was fear, the kind that comes when arrogance finally meets skill beyond reckoning. The leader of the biker gang staggered back, disbelief written across his face. For the first time, he realized the quiet man in the corner was no ordinary civilian, but pride, dangerous, blinding pride, still held him captive. He wasn't about to admit fear in front of his gang. "Come on, old man, you think a few fancy moves scare us?" he barked, though his voice wavered slightly. The other bikers shuffled uncertainly, their bravado faltering as they glanced at the fallen comrades sprawled across the diner floor. Phones were raised, capturing the scene for posterity, their flashes briefly illuminating the tension in the room. The man adjusted his jacket with deliberate calm, his eyes scanning each biker like a predator calculating the next move. Every movement radiated confidence, controlled precision. There was no panic, no hesitation, only anticipation. The room seemed to shrink around him, the air thick with a silent warning that these bikers were in way over their heads. One of the younger bikers, trying to reclaim authority, swung at him with a fist. Seagal moved with almost imperceptible speed, sidestepping and redirecting the biker's momentum. The force sent the man stumbling into a table, chairs toppling as breakfast dishes clattered to the floor. The biker barely had time to react before Seagal was behind him, a gentle push sending him sprawling onto the diner's polished tile. Gasps and murmurs echoed through the diner. The patrons watched in awe, some frozen in fear, others wide-eyed with admiration. Phones captured every second. Nobody dared intervene. This wasn't a simple fight. This was a lesson in absolute mastery. The leader tried to rally his gang, shouting commands, but chaos had already taken root. Seagal moved with a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. A flick of the wrist disarmed one biker. A pivot and a sweep of the leg sent another crashing into a wall. It wasn't brutal, it was surgical. Every strike, every movement was calculated, precise, efficient, a demonstration of skill that the gang had never imagined. You're insane," the leader finally stammered, fear creeping into his voice. Sweat glistened on his brow, and for the first time he looked small, vulnerable. His hands trembled as he tried to raise his fists. Seagal didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a warning, a silent message that the consequences of arrogance were immediate and inevitable. With a swift, flowing series of moves, he disabled the remaining bikers, each one ending up immobilized, bewildered, and humiliated. Not a single move wasted, not a single ounce of effort spent unnecessarily. The diner went completely silent. The smell of adrenaline, mixed with spilled coffee and overturned chairs, hung in the air. The bikers sprawled across the floor were too stunned to even comprehend what had happened. The leader's eyes darted around, seeking help, but there was none. He had underestimated the man in the corner, and now the lesson had been delivered, merciless, undeniable. Seagal adjusted his sunglasses, picked up the cup of tea he had set aside moments ago, and took a calm sip. The diners' mouths hung open, some still recording, others staring in awe. This wasn't just a fight. This was a demonstration of power, control, and respect. The leader groaned, pushing himself up, humiliated beyond words. The others scrambled to their feet, shaking, and shuffled out the door, muttering apologies, murmuring promises they wouldn't keep, and looking over their shoulders. The roar of their engines faded, replaced once again by the quiet hum of the small-town street. And there he sat, calm, collected, serene. A man who had walked into a storm and made it bow to his presence. Steven Seagal wasn't just a fighter, he was a living legend. Every eye in the diner remained glued to him, silently acknowledging that what they had just witnessed was more than a fight. It was history in motion. The diner was deathly quiet. Broken chairs, spilled coffee, and scattered plates painted a picture of chaos. Yet the storm had passed. Patrons slowly lifted their heads, eyes wide, hearts still racing, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Some whispered to each other, others remained frozen in awe, and almost everyone had their phones raised, recording the scene. The bikers, now outside, were huddled together near their motorcycles, faces pale and expressions of disbelief. Their leader, the first to provoke, leaned against a bike, trembling. The roar of engines had turned into the quiet hum of a retreat. The once confident gang now humbled and shaken to their core. Some muttered apologies under their breath, but it was too late. The lesson had been delivered. Inside, Steven Seagal remained seated at his corner table, calm as ever. He adjusted his jacket, took another slow sip of tea, and scanned the diner with a serene gaze. His sunglasses reflected the fluorescent lights above, but the fire in his eyes suggested something far stronger: awareness, control, and quiet authority. Every patron instinctively understood that this was a man who commanded respect without demanding it, whose silence spoke louder than words. An older waitress, shaking slightly, approached him. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Seagal gave a small, reassuring nod. "I'm fine. Everyone else?" His gaze swept the room, resting briefly on the stunned diners. "Better now that the danger has passed," he said calmly, almost as if he were merely commenting on the weather. People began to murmur, slowly regaining their composure. A young man who had been recording the event looked at his phone, then up at Seagal. Did that really just happen?" he asked, barely believing his own eyes. "Yes," another patron whispered, shaking their head. He's a legend." The older waitress hesitated, then asked the question on everyone's mind. How did you do that? They were so violent." Seagal leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, and took a measured sip of tea. "It's not about fighting," he said quietly, his voice calm but carrying undeniable authority. "It's about awareness, control, and respect. Most people never understand that until it's too late." The diner slowly began to return to normal. Some patrons helped upright chairs and tables, while others checked on spilled drinks and broken dishes. The tension in the air began to fade, replaced by a quiet reverence. Everyone knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, not just a fight, but a lesson in mastery, patience and power, tempered by restraint. Out on the street, the bikers were already mounting their motorcycles, glancing nervously at the diner's windows. Their leader, pale and shaken, muttered something to his gang. Engines revved, but this time the roar had no arrogance, no swagger, only fear and respect. One by one, they peeled out, leaving behind a trail of dust, the echo of their engines fading into the distance. Inside, Seagal finished his tea, placed the cup down with deliberate calm, and stood. He adjusted his jacket one last time, glanced around the diner, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the patrons who had shown courage, patience, and quiet respect. Then, without another word, he walked toward the door, each step measured, calm, and deliberate, a man leaving a storm behind him, untouched and unshaken. As the door closed behind him, the diner remained still for a long moment. Then, slowly, life began to return. Whispers filled the air, phones were lowered, and patrons began to share their astonishment. One thing was certain: the legend of that afternoon, the quiet, unstoppable man, would never be forgotten. The afternoon sun streamed through the diner windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Broken chairs and scattered dishes still bore witness to the chaos that had erupted only moments before. Patrons, once frozen with fear and awe, now began to murmur among themselves, sharing what they had witnessed with wide eyes and incredulous voices. Every corner of the room seemed to hum with the unspoken acknowledgement. Today they had seen something extraordinary. Steven Seagal stood near the door, calm, composed, every movement deliberate. His jacket hung perfectly on his shoulders, his posture straight, and his eyes, partially hidden behind his dark sunglasses, surveyed the room with quiet authority. He had not raised his voice once. He had not wasted a single motion, and yet the lesson had been learned. And it was unforgettable. A young man, still holding his phone, finally found the courage to speak. "Sir, why didn't you just fight them like normal? Why show them all that?" His voice trembled, half in fear, half in awe. Seagal paused, considering the question. Then, with a calm but firm voice, he replied, "True strength isn't about proving yourself in anger. It's about control, awareness, and understanding. You don't need to fight every battle physically. Often the battle is won simply by knowing your own power and letting others see it only when necessary." A murmur of agreement swept through the room. People exchanged glances, realizing that what they had witnessed wasn't just martial skill, it was discipline, patience, and the wisdom of experience. An older waitress, finally regaining her composure, asked softly, "But they were so violent. Don't you feel anything?" Seagal shook his head slightly, a calm expression on his face. "Fear and violence are only effective if you let them be. I didn't act out of anger. I acted to protect, to teach, and to restore order. Respect is earned, not demanded, and those who underestimate it often learn too late." The diner's patrons nodded, some whispering quietly to each other, while others simply stared, absorbing every word. Even the young man with the phone lowered it, realizing that no recording could truly capture what they had just witnessed. The lesson, the presence, the mastery, it was something that had to be experienced to be understood. Outside, the once threatening bikers had disappeared down the dusty road, their engines fading into silence. Their arrogance had been replaced with humility, fear, and a grudging respect. They had learned a lesson they would not soon forget, that underestimating quiet strength can be catastrophic. Seagal turned toward the door, ready to leave, but not before giving one final nod to the diners. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it carried immense weight. A silent acknowledgement of those who had remained calm, observant, and respectful, even in the midst of chaos. As he stepped outside, the air seemed to shift. The sounds of the small town returned, distant voices, the soft hum of engines, birds singing, but the memory of what had just occurred lingered, etched into the minds of everyone who had been present. It wasn't just a fight that had happened, it was a lesson in patience, control, and the quiet power of a man who could command respect without ever raising his voice. And as Steven Seagal walked away, moving with the calm, measured grace of someone who had seen it all before, one thing became crystal clear to everyone in that diner. True strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It is felt, it is seen, and above all, it is respected. The legend wasn't just alive. It had walked among them that day, leaving a mark far deeper than any scar, bruise, or broken chair. The lesson, the story, the awe-inspiring calm power of Steven Seagal would be told for years to come. The diner had returned to a semblance of normalcy, though nothing about it would ever feel the same. Broken chairs had been propped back into place, spilled coffee mopped up, and plates cleared away. Yet the energy in the room remained electric, the echoes of the confrontation lingering in every corner. Patrons whispered quietly to one another, their voices tinged with awe, disbelief, and a newfound respect for calm strength. Steven Seagal, standing near the door, adjusted his jacket one last time. His dark sunglasses reflected the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, hiding eyes that had seen far more than anyone in that diner could imagine. Every muscle in his body moved with controlled precision, a quiet testament to decades of discipline, training, and experience. He didn't rush. He didn't boast. He simply exuded an undeniable authority that demanded respect without a word. The young man who had been recording finally lowered his phone, unsure if he could capture the gravity of what had just unfolded. "Sir, what happens now?" he asked, his voice shaking. Seagal's gaze swept over the diners, each of whom had watched the events unfold in stunned silence. "Now?" he said softly, almost rhetorically. "Now, you remember? You understand. You know that arrogance can blind judgment, that violence is never the first solution, and that respect is earned, never assumed. What you saw here today wasn't about defeating others. It was about showing that true strength is silent, precise, and controlled." A hush fell over the room. The older waitress, still trembling slightly, asked, "And the bikers? Won't they come back?" Seagal shook his head slowly. They learned a lesson, not just about fighting, about underestimating someone they didn't understand. Lessons like that, they leave a mark. Fear, yes, but also respect, and sometimes that's enough to change behavior more than force ever could. Outside, the fading sun cast long shadows across the quiet street. The hum of distant engines had vanished. The once confident bikers had disappeared, humbled and chastised, their bravado stripped away by someone who had been underestimated at every step. Seagal turned toward the door one last time, pausing to look back at the diners. A subtle nod acknowledged the ones who had stayed calm, observed carefully, and respected everyone in the room, regardless of appearances. "Strength isn't loud," he said softly, "but it is unmistakable." As he stepped out, the world seemed to pause briefly, as if holding its breath in recognition. People in the diner continued to murmur among themselves, sharing their disbelief, replaying the fluidity, the precision, and the almost supernatural calm of the man who had walked into their lives like a shadow and left an indelible mark. For those who had watched silently, a lesson remained: arrogance blinds, assumptions are dangerous, and the quietest, calmest person in a room may be the most formidable of all. The legend didn't need a spotlight, it didn't need applause, it simply moved through the world, observing, correcting, and teaching, leaving behind awe, respect, and the unforgettable memory of mastery in action. The diner slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm. Coffee brewed, conversations resumed, and the air smelled once again of pancakes and syrup. Yet everyone knew something had changed. They had glimpsed true mastery, and it would stay with them forever. As the camera pans to the empty doorway, sunlight glinting off the polished floor, one truth lingers in the air: true power is silent, true respect is earned, and legends, they don't need to announce themselves. The world already knows. If you believe in calm strength and true mastery, type legend in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. The small town diner slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the atmosphere was forever changed. The lingering silence had been replaced by quiet conversations, whispers of awe, and the faint sound of people replaying the events in their minds. Broken chairs and scattered dishes told a story of chaos, but the real story was written in the minds of those who had witnessed it, a lesson about power, respect, and the consequences of arrogance. Steven Seagal's presence had transformed an ordinary afternoon into something extraordinary, not through noise, not through threats, and not through anger, but through control, discipline, and an unshakable calm. That was the mark of a legend. He had walked into a room full of hostility, conflict, and bravado, and yet, without shouting or proving anything unnecessarily, he had restored order and left a lasting impression that words alone could never convey. The patrons slowly realized the deeper message. Respect isn't about fear, appearances, or force. It's about acknowledgement, patience, and understanding. True power doesn't need to announce itself. It exists quietly, efficiently, and decisively, revealing itself only when necessary. The bikers had learned this the hard way, and so had anyone watching. A young man at the back of the diner finally spoke aloud, breaking the lingering tension. I think I understand now. It's not about fighting first. It's about knowing your own strength and choosing wisely when to use it. Seagal, already at the doorway, glanced back at the room, a subtle smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Exactly," he said softly. "Many people spend their lives trying to prove something to the world. Few understand that true mastery is shown through restraint, observation, and respect for yourself and for others." The older waitress, who had remained composed despite the chaos, nodded slowly. "So the lesson isn't just for the bikers?" she asked. "No," Seagal replied. "It's for everyone. Arrogance can blind you, impatience can trap you, and disrespect can destroy opportunities. But calm, measured action, combined with awareness, can overcome even the most reckless challenges. Never underestimate the quiet ones, the ones who observe, who wait, and who act with precision. They often carry more power than anyone imagines." Outside, the street had returned to its normal pace. The bikers had long vanished, engines fading into the distance, carrying with them the humility and fear of having underestimated someone they thought was weak. Their arrogance had been replaced by respect and understanding that appearances can deceive and that true strength is revealed only when tested. Inside the diner, patrons began to help each other clear up the remaining mess. Broken chairs were set upright, spilled coffee mopped, and chairs replaced. Yet the lesson lingered, far stronger than any physical debris. The energy in the room had shifted, leaving behind a sense of awe, reverence, and a reminder that respect is earned, not assumed. Seagal's silhouette disappeared into the late afternoon sunlight, leaving the door open, the diner bathed in the golden glow of an ordinary day forever altered. And in that quiet moment, one truth was undeniable. The calmest, most measured individuals are often the most formidable. They don't need to shout. They don't need to prove themselves constantly, and they don't need the approval of others. Their strength speaks for itself, silently and unmistakably. And so the legend remained, walking through the world, leaving lessons behind, teaching restraint, respect, and mastery, a story for the ages, one that would be retold for years, inspiring those who understood that power isn't always loud and greatness doesn't always announce itself. If you believe in calm strength, discipline, and true mastery, type respect in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that silence, patience, and skill are the greatest forms of power.